On May 26, 2024, two 500-pound bombs dropped on a refugee camp in Rafah and ignited a fire that killed 45 people, most of them civilians sleeping in tents. Investigators later found fragments at the scene. Serial number 81873. That number traces back to a factory in Santa Clarita, California, a company called Woodward. They make the guidance fins that turn unguided bombs into precision munitions. The fins were attached to bombs whose metal bodies were forged by General Dynamics in Pennsylvania. The guidance kits that tell those bombs where to go were manufactured by Boeing in Missouri, and the plane that dropped them, an F-35 fighter jet, was built by Lockheed Martin in Texas, with engines made by Pratt & Whitney in Connecticut. 5 American companies, 1 massacre, and that is just 2 bombs. Since October 7, 2023, over 70,000 tons of explosives have been dropped on Gaza. Every single one has a supply chain. Every guidance system has a manufacturer. Every bulldozer flattening a neighborhood has a corporate logo on the side. And every database tracking Palestinian faces at checkpoints runs on servers owned by some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley. This is not about foreign aid. This is about profit. There is a reason Wall Street executives celebrated in earnings calls while Gaza burned. There is a reason pension funds in Norway started divesting. There is a reason employees at Google and Amazon got fired for asking questions. One name on the corporate complicity list is not who you think it is. And by the end of this, you will know exactly how a genocide became a business model, who built that model, and why the money never stops flowing, even when the bombs do. The official story is simple. The United States gives Israel $3.8 billion a year in military aid. Germany sends submarines out of historical guilt. The international community supports a democratic ally in a tough neighborhood. That story is a lie, not because the facts are wrong, but because they are incomplete. The $3.8 billion is not charity. 75% of it must be spent on American weapons. It is a subsidy for Lockheed Martin, not a gift to Israel. The German submarines are built by ThyssenKrupp, and the contracts keep German shipyards employed. Even the so-called aid is an investment. And underneath that investment sits a machinery of profit so vast, so decentralized, and so deeply embedded in the global economy that calling it funding misses the point entirely. This is a story about a self-sustaining financial ecosystem, about how a military occupation generates revenue through weapons exports marketed as battle-tested, about tech companies that provide the cloud infrastructure for mass surveillance and call it innovation, about bulldozer manufacturers whose equipment destroys Palestinian homes on Monday and gets shipped to the U.S.-Mexico border on Wednesday, about pension funds that hold stock in all of it without most teachers and firefighters ever knowing, about a system so diffuse that everyone involved can claim they are just doing their job while the system itself produces violence at industrial scale. 3 macro loops drive this investigation. First, the money does not flow in one direction. Israel is not just a recipient of aid, it is an exporter of military technology, and the occupied territories are the showroom. Gaza is not a tragedy, it is a product demo. Second, the corporations profiting from this are not just weapons manufacturers. They are companies you interact with daily. If you have ever used Google Search, ordered from Amazon, or contributed to a retirement fund, you are closer to this than you think. And third, there is a financial instrument worth $1.3 billion in 2023 that most people have never heard of, and it is older than the State of Israel itself. We will come back to all 3. But first, we need to understand what changed. Because for decades, Israel was indeed a recipient, dependent on American military aid, a client state with a powerful lobby but limited economic independence. And then something shifted. Israel became an arms exporter, a tech hub, a testing ground for surveillance systems that are now sold to dictatorships on 3 continents. The transformation did not happen by accident. It happened because occupation became profitable. And once that happened, the question of who funds Israel stopped making sense. The correct question is, who profits from Israel, and how did they turn war into a renewable resource? Let us start with the weapon that started this, the GBU-39 small-diameter bomb. Boeing calls it the SDB. Weight, 250 pounds. Warhead, only 50 pounds of explosives. marketed as a precision weapon for urban environments. Low collateral damage, they said. Ideal for minimizing civilian casualties, they said. By June 2024, Israel had dropped so many of them on Gaza that the New York Times called it their weapon of choice. The problem with a weapon designed to minimize casualties is that it only works if you care about minimizing casualties. When you drop it on a refugee camp, precision just means you hit exactly what you aimed at. And when what you aimed at is a tent full of children, the guidance system does not refuse the order. Boeing expedited 1,000 of these bombs to Israel in October 2023. Part of an older order from 2021 placed during the previous bombardment. The bombs were already paid for. They just moved up the delivery schedule. No new approvals needed. No congressional review. Just a logistics question. Can we get them there faster? The answer was yes. But Boeing does not make the whole bomb. The metal body is forged by General Dynamics at plants in Pennsylvania and Texas. The guidance kit is Boeing, manufactured in Missouri. And those wing actuators, the tiny motors that adjust the fins mid-flight to keep the bomb on target, those are made by Woodward in Santa Clarita. A single supply chain spanning 4 states. Each company takes a cut. Each factory employs workers who have no idea where the product ends up. And each piece arrives in Israel, gets assembled, loaded onto an F-35, and dropped on a grid reference selected by an algorithm that we will get to later. If you have never seen this story told this way, subscribe. More investigations like this every week. Serial number 81873 was manufactured in 2022. That means it sat in a warehouse for 2 years before it killed anyone. Boeing does not track what happens after delivery. Woodward does not ask. General Dynamics does not follow up. Legally, they do not have to. Once the U.S. government approves the export, the manufacturers are insulated. The Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act shields Israel from most lawsuits. Corporate liability disappears behind the word ally. And the bomb that starts as raw steel in Pennsylvania and ends as shrapnel in a child's tent never generates a paper trail connecting the death to the dividend. That dividend is real. On October 24, 2023, 10 days after the bombardment began, RTX held an earnings call. RTX used to be called Raytheon. They make missiles, lots of them. The CEO, Greg Hayes, told investors that the conflicts in Ukraine and Israel would generate a benefit across the entire Raytheon portfolio. Not might, would. He said it out loud, on a recorded call. Lockheed Martin's CEO said the same thing a week earlier. Israel and Ukraine are revenue drivers, direct quote. And Wall Street responded the way Wall Street always does. Stock prices went up. This is the first mechanism, war as market opportunity. But it is not the only mechanism, and it is not the most important one. Because the weapons manufacturers are obvious. Everyone knows Lockheed makes missiles. The shock is not that they profit from war. The shock is how many other companies profit from war without ever being called weapons manufacturers. Companies that sell cloud storage. Companies that make bulldozers. Companies that manage your retirement savings. And the shock is how the system is designed so that every participant can deny responsibility while the gears keep turning. Let us talk about those gears. The United States gives Israel $3.8 billion every year under a memorandum signed in 2016, running through 2028. That number gets repeated constantly. What does not get repeated is the fine print. 75% of that aid must be spent on weapons made in America. It is not a gift, it is a voucher. Israel gets $3.8 billion in credit at the Lockheed Martin store, and Lockheed gets $3.8 billion in guaranteed revenue, paid for by American taxpayers, with zero commercial risk. But here is what makes it more than a subsidy. Israel does not just buy American weapons. Israel co-develops them. The F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the most expensive weapons program in human history, includes Israeli components. Elbit Systems, Israel's largest arms manufacturer, provides the helmet-mounted display. Israeli engineers work inside Lockheed facilities in Texas, and when the F-35 sells to other countries, Poland, Japan, South Korea, Israel gets a royalty. The aid money becomes seed capital. It flows to Lockheed. Lockheed pays Elbit. Elbit hires Israeli engineers, and those engineers create intellectual property that generates export revenue. The $3.8 billion turns into $13 billion in Israeli arms exports by 2023, from recipient to exporter. And the product they export is not theoretical, it is combat-proven. That phrase appears in marketing materials for Israeli weapons systems. Combat-proven, meaning tested on Palestinians. The Hermes drone, made by Elbit, has been operating over Gaza since 2009. Thousands of flight hours, dozens of airstrikes. By 2024, it is sold to 30 countries. The marketing pitch writes itself. This system has been used in the most complex urban warfare environment on Earth. Translation: we have bombed dense civilian neighborhoods for 15 years and the drone still works. Gaza is not a tragedy in this logic. Gaza is quality assurance. Here is where the model becomes self-sustaining. The American aid buys American weapons. Those weapons get used in operations that generate data, battlefield performance metrics, and iterative design improvements. Israel takes those improvements, applies them to domestically produced systems, and exports the result. The export revenue exceeds the aid money. Israel is no longer dependent. The aid continues anyway because American manufacturers need the guaranteed contracts, and because the geopolitical value of having a militarized ally in the region outweighs the cost. Everyone wins, except the people in Gaza, but they do not appear on the earnings call. That is the state level. That is the visible money. $3.8 billion from the United States, subsidies from Germany for submarines, trade agreements with the European Union that allow Israeli products tariff-free access to markets of 450 million people. All of that is public. All of it shows up in budgets and treaties and congressional votes. And all of it is a distraction from the real money. The real money is corporate, and it moves through 3 channels: direct contracts, cloud infrastructure, and passive investment. Let us start with contracts. On December 6, 2023, a U.S. Air Force cargo plane landed at Nevatim Air Base in southern Israel. The plane was a C-17 Globemaster, built by Boeing. It was carrying armored Humvees, built by AM General. The armor plating on those Humvees was manufactured by Plasan, an Israeli company with a factory in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The vehicles were transported to the airbase by Atlas Air, a cargo carrier owned by a consortium of private equity firms including Apollo Global Management. The whole operation was coordinated by a Department of Defense team called the Tiger Team, assembled after October 7th to expedite weapons exports. The Tiger Team hired contractors to staff the operation. 2 of those contractors were Hoplite Group and Sigmatech, both based in the southern United States, both recruiting employees on LinkedIn in November 2023 for positions described as Israel Weapons Logistics. 5 companies, 1 delivery. And that was just December 6th. The weapons flights have been documented by open-source researchers tracking flight paths. Between October and March, cargo planes made over 400 flights from American air bases to Israel. Some were military transports. Many were commercial carriers. Atlas Air appears again and again. So does Kalitta Air, based in Michigan. National Airlines out of Florida. Western Global Airlines. Cal Cargo. An Israeli freight company. These are not weapons manufacturers. They are logistics companies. FedEx for bombs, and they are getting paid per flight. Nobody is protesting outside Atlas Air headquarters. Nobody is calling for a boycott of Kalitta, because nobody knows who they are. The weapons get the headlines. The supply chain stays invisible, and the supply chain is where the money is. Lockheed Martin made $79 billion in revenue in 2023. Boeing made $77 billion. General Dynamics made $42 billion. But those numbers include everything. Fighter jets for the U.S. Air Force, submarines for the Navy, civilian aircraft. The Israel contracts are a fraction. Profitable, yes. Enough to move stock prices, absolutely. But a fraction. Now look at the logistics companies. Atlas Air does does not make anything. They move things. And in 2023, moving weapons to Israel became a growth sector. The contracts are smaller in absolute terms, but the profit margins are higher because there is no R&D, no manufacturing overhead, just planes and fuel and DoD money. And because the flights are classified as military support, they are exempt from the usual commercial regulations, which means Atlas can charge whatever the Pentagon will pay, and the Pentagon, when it is in expedite mode, pays a lot. This is the second mechanism, outsourced logistics as profit center. The Pentagon does not have enough cargo capacity to move everything Israel is ordering, so it contracts private carriers. Those carriers charge premium rates for military freight. The DoD pays those rates out of the annual defense budget, and the defense budget, $764 billion in 2023, is so large that nobody notices a few $100 million for cargo flights, except the shareholders of Apollo Global Management. They notice, but logistics is still tied to weapons. You can draw a straight line from the bomb to the profit. The third channel is where that line disappears: cloud infrastructure. In 2021, Israel signed a contract worth $1.2 billion with Google and Amazon. The contract is called Project Nimbus. It provides cloud computing services to the Israeli government, all branches: the military, the Shin Bet, Israel's internal security agency, the police, the prison service, and an array of government ministries, including those responsible for administering the occupied West Bank. Google and Amazon split the contract. They provide access to their full suite of AI tools, data analytics, and machine learning platforms. The contract includes a clause that is unusual for tech companies: no standard terms of use, meaning Israel gets to decide how to use the tools with no oversight from Google or Amazon. And another clause: the Israeli government can veto any decision by Google or Amazon to restrict or suspend service, meaning even if Google wanted to stop providing AI to the military, Israel could force them to continue. Project Nimbus has been public knowledge since 2021. It generated some protests. A few dozen Google employees signed a letter, got ignored. But the real expansion happened after October 7th, and it was not public. In October 2023, the Israeli Ministry of Defense sent an urgent request to Google. They wanted expanded access to Vertex, a Google AI platform that allows users to apply machine learning algorithms to their own datasets. Google approved the request, fast-tracked it. By November, Israeli military intelligence was using Vertex to process surveillance data from Gaza. In March 2024, the Israeli military signed a direct consulting contract with Google, not through Nimbus, a separate deal. The purpose was to expand access to Gemini, Google's newest generative AI language model. By June, Israeli forces were using Google Photos facial recognition features as part of a mass surveillance operation at checkpoints in Gaza. Soldiers were equipped with tablets. Refugees fleeing south were stopped. Cameras scanned their faces. The images were run through Google's facial recognition algorithms. Matches were flagged. Thousands of people were detained. The Israeli military later admitted that the vast majority were civilians, not combatants, just people trying to leave. Google's official statement, when asked about this, said that Project Nimbus is not directed at highly sensitive or classified military workloads. That statement was made in 2022. It has not been updated, and it is technically true in the narrowest possible sense. Nimbus is a contract with the government, not exclusively with the military. The military just happens to be part of the government, and facial recognition is not classified. It is a consumer product. You use it to organize your photos. Israel uses it to build arrest lists. Microsoft's involvement is even larger. The Israeli military's consumption of Microsoft Azure cloud services increased by 155% between June 2023 and April 2024. Azure provides the infrastructure for the military's central data center. That data center integrates hundreds of combat, intelligence, and command systems. It also hosts an AI targeting platform called Lavender. Lavender was revealed by an investigation from the outlet Plus 972 magazine in April 2024. The system generates target lists automatically. It analyzes surveillance data, communication patterns, and movement tracking. Then it assigns every person in Gaza a score. The The score represents the probability that the person is a member of Hamas. If the score is high enough, the person goes on a kill list. And here is the thing. The system has a 10% error rate, meaning 1 in 10 people on the list are not actually combatants. The Israeli military knows this. They use the system anyway, because it is fast. A human analyst might generate 10 targets a day. Lavender generates hundreds, and Lavender runs on Microsoft Azure. Microsoft's involvement does not stop there. Between October 2023 and June 2024, Microsoft provided 19,000 hours of engineering support and consulting services to the Israeli military. That is direct technical assistance, not just selling software, sending engineers. By March 2024, the military's consumption of Azure AI services was 64 times higher than before October. 64 times. And Microsoft's stock price, for those keeping track, went up 14%. Now Amazon. Amazon Web Services hosts the Israeli military's Central Intelligence Database. According to reports, that database contains information on almost everyone in Gaza. 2 million people. Names, addresses, phone numbers, family relationships, travel history, social media activity, financial transactions. All of it stored on Amazon servers, accessible to military intelligence, updated in real time. Amazon has not commented on the specifics. But in December 2024, employees filed a lawsuit alleging that Amazon unlawfully suppressed internal dissent about the company's work in Israel. The lawsuit says that managers told employees not to discuss Gaza, threatened them with termination if they organized, and fired multiple workers who participated in a vigil for Palestinian victims. Amazon denies wrongdoing. The lawsuit is ongoing, but the fact that it exists tells you something. There are people inside Amazon who know what the servers are being used for, and they tried to say something, and they got fired. Here is why this matters more than the bombs. Bombs are discrete. You can count them. Track them, measure them. 500 bombs dropped in a week, 2,000-pound Mk-84. Serial numbers, factory locations. You can build a database, trace the supply chain, name the manufacturers. And activists do. There are entire organizations dedicated to tracking weapons exports. They publish reports, file lawsuits, run divestment campaigns. Some of them work. Norway's sovereign wealth fund excluded several weapons companies in 2024. University endowments divested from Caterpillar and Elbit. But cloud infrastructure is invisible. It is ones and zeros. No serial numbers. No shipping manifests. No customs declarations. Google does not report how much processing power the Israeli military used last quarter. Microsoft does not break out Azure revenue by client. Amazon does not say whose data is stored where. The contracts are confidential. The usage metrics are proprietary. And even if you could get the numbers, what would you do with them? Boycott Gmail? Stop using Amazon? Divest from Microsoft? Good luck. These companies are embedded in everything. Your email, your shopping, your work computer, the servers hosting the website you are reading this on. That is the genius of it. Weapons manufacturers are targets. Tech companies are infrastructure, and infrastructure is invisible until it stops working. But wait, if Google and Amazon are making money from Israeli military contracts, and those contracts are worth $1.2 billion, and the stock prices went up, who actually profits? You do, maybe. If you have a retirement account, a 401k, a pension, an index fund, you probably own shares in these companies. Vanguard and BlackRock are the two largest asset managers in the world. Combined, they manage over $20 trillion. Most of that money is in passive index funds, funds that automatically buy shares in every large company in a given market. The S&P 500, the NASDAQ, global equity indexes. If you own an S&P 500 index fund, you own Lockheed Martin, you own Boeing, you own Raytheon, now called RTX. You own Caterpillar, you own General Dynamics, you own Northrop Grumman, you own Microsoft, you own Amazon, You own Google's parent company, Alphabet, and you had no choice. Because passive index funds do not let you pick which companies to exclude. You buy the index, you buy everything in it. Teachers' pensions, firefighters' retirement funds, university endowments, all of them hold these stocks. Not because anyone decided that funding weapons manufacturers was a good idea, but because passive investing became the default, and passive investing means buying everything. This is structural complicity. Nobody is pro-genocide, but the system produces genocide anyway, because every actor in the system is making a rational decision within their own context. Lockheed makes missiles because that is what Lockheed does. Google sells cloud services because that is what Google does. Pension fund managers buy index funds because that is the fiduciary standard. And the geometry of those rational decisions, added together, produces something none of them would individually endorse. But it is not quite that simple, because some investors did make a choice. In October 2024, Norway's largest asset manager, Storebrand, divested from Palantir. Palantir is a data analytics company. They build software for governments and militaries, predictive policing, surveillance systems, targeting platforms. In January 2024, Palantir entered into what they called a strategic partnership with Israel's Ministry of Defense. The CEO, Alex Karp, went on record saying he was proud that Palantir was supporting Israel in every way we can. Storebrand looked at that statement, looked at the reports coming out of Gaza, and decided that holding Palantir stock created a risk of complicity in violations of international humanitarian law. They sold $24 million in shares, not because it was illegal, not because they were forced to, because they decided the risk was unacceptable. That is one fund, one decision, out of trillions of dollars in global assets. But it is proof that the choice exists. Passive investing is not actually passive. It is a series of active decisions disguised as neutrality. The decision to include weapons manufacturers in an index. The decision not to screen for human rights violations. The decision to prioritize returns over ethics. These are choices, and when the returns come from weapons used in a genocide, neutrality is complicity. Remember the number from earlier, 1.3 billion. That is not Nimbus. That is something older. Israel bonds. Established in 1951, 3 years after the founding of the state, the Israel Bonds program allows individuals and institutions to purchase bonds issued by the government of Israel. The bonds pay interest. They mature after a set number of years, and the money raised goes directly into Israel's treasury. In 2023, Israel bonds raised $1.3 billion, most of it from American buyers, some institutional investors, pension funds, endowments, but a lot of it from individual retail investors, people buying bonds the same way they might buy savings bonds from the U.S. Treasury, except U.S. savings bonds fund infrastructure, education, social security. Israel bonds fund whatever Israel wants to fund. And in 2023, a significant portion of Israel's budget went to the military, $35 billion, more than a quarter of total government spending. The bonds do not come with labels. You cannot buy a bond designated for schools and refuse a bond designated for missiles. The money is fungible. It goes into the same pot, and the pot pays for F-35s, and the pot pays for surveillance systems, and the pot pays for demolishing Palestinian neighborhoods to build buffer zones. Israel bonds are marketed through a network of diaspora organizations. Synagogues host bond drives. Community centers distribute brochures. There is an emotional appeal. Support the homeland. Invest in the future. Stand with Israel. And for many buyers, that emotional appeal is sincere. They are not thinking about weapons. They are thinking about identity, history, survival. The marketing does not mention Gaza. It does not need to. But the money still flows, and the money still kills. Here is the thing. Criticizing Israel bonds gets you called anti-Semitic faster than almost anything else, because the program is wrapped in the language of Jewish survival. After the Holocaust, after 2,000 years of persecution, after being driven from country after country, the bonds are framed as a way for Jews in the diaspora to support the one place on earth where they are guaranteed safety. That framing is powerful, and for many people it is not cynical. It is real, but it is also a shield, because once you frame financial support for a government as part of an identity, criticizing that support becomes criticizing the identity, and then the conversation stops. You are not arguing about policy. You are arguing about peoplehood, and peoplehood does not yield to spreadsheets. Yet the spreadsheets are clear. $1.3 billion in 2023, raised through bonds, spent by a government actively demolishing neighborhoods, running facial recognition on refugees, and dropping precision munitions on tents. The intent of the buyer does not change the use of the money. A bond purchased in good faith by someone who genuinely believes they are supporting Jewish safety still pays for the same bombs as a bond purchased by someone who explicitly endorses the violence. The money is neutral. The violence is not. And this is where the conversation has to go if it is going to be honest. Supporting Israel and opposing its actions in Gaza are not contradictory unless you define Israel as synonymous with its current government and current policies. But that is exactly how the issue gets framed. Criticize the policy, get accused of denying the right to exist, ask where the money goes, get told you are questioning the legitimacy of Jewish self-determination. The rhetorical move is consistent. Collapse the distinction between state and people. Make every financial question a moral referendum, and shut down the inquiry before the numbers come out. But the numbers are coming out. Forensic accountants are tracking the bonds. Researchers are mapping the contracts. Journalists are reading the declassified memos. And what they are finding is a system where hundreds of billions of dollars move every year through a network so complex that no single actor can be held accountable, but every actor profits. Let us go back to the ground. Because all of this, the bonds and the cloud services and the index funds, all of it ends up in the same place, a specific piece of machinery doing a specific job. And that machinery has a corporate logo on the side, Caterpillar D9. It is a bulldozer, armored, weighs 70 tons. The blade is 14 feet wide. The engine produces 410 horsepower, and it has been used by the Israeli military since the early 2000s to demolish Palestinian homes. The D9 is not marketed as a weapon. It is construction equipment. Caterpillar sells it to civilian customers all over the world, mining companies, infrastructure projects, disaster relief. Perfectly legal, perfectly normal. But Caterpillar also sells a militarized version to the Israeli Defense Forces. That version has armor plating, bulletproof glass, and reinforced treads. It is designed to operate in combat zones, and the Israeli military uses it for two purposes: clearing roads and destroying buildings. In the West Bank, the D9 has been documented demolishing homes for decades. Sometimes the homes belong to families of accused attackers. Punitive demolitions, they are called. Collective punishment, which is illegal under international law, but happens anyway. Sometimes the homes are demolished to make way for settlement expansion. The bulldozer clears the land. The settlement gets built. The people who lived there get displaced, and Caterpillar gets paid. In Gaza, the D9 has been used in every major military operation since 2004. Operation Rainbow, Operation Cast Lead, Operation Protective Edge, and now, since October 7th, the largest operation yet. The Israeli military ordered dozens of additional D9s immediately after the attack. They were delivered within weeks, and by December, those bulldozers were operating inside Gaza, clearing paths for tanks, demolishing buildings where militants might be hiding, and systematically destroying entire neighborhoods along the border to create a buffer zone. That buffer zone is now half a mile wide. It runs along the entire eastern and northern perimeter of Gaza, roughly 16% of the Strip's total area. Homes, schools, farms, olive groves, all of it bulldozed flat. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said in February 2024 that extensive destruction of property, not justified by military necessity and carried out unlawfully and wantonly, amounts to a grave breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention and a war crime. Caterpillar's response when asked about this is that they have no control over how customers use their equipment, which is technically true. Once the bulldozer is sold, Caterpillar does not track it. They do not impose restrictions. They do not monitor usage. The sale is final. The liability ends. Except liability is a legal concept, not a moral one, and the moral question is simple. If you sell a weapon to someone and they use it to commit a war crime and you keep selling them more weapons, are you complicit? Caterpillar says no. Activists say yes, and the argument has been running for 20 years. But here is what changed in 2023. The bulldozers started appearing on camera doing something new. On December 16th, videos emerged showing a bulldozer at Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza. The hospital courtyard was full of displaced people sheltering in tents. The bulldozer, according to eyewitness reports, drove into the courtyard and ran over several tents. People were crushed. The exact number is disputed. The Israeli military said the operation was targeting militants hiding in the hospital. Human rights groups said there was no evidence of militants. The bulldozer was a Caterpillar D9. Then in March, another video. Al-Nusayrat camp in central Gaza. A bulldozer dragging 2 bodies through the dirt. The bodies belonged to Palestinian men who had been shot by Israeli soldiers. The video shows the bulldozer pulling the bodies behind it, then burying them in a sand berm. The men appeared unarmed in earlier footage. One was waving white fabric, and the bulldozer, again, was a Caterpillar D9. These are not demolitions. These are not counterinsurgency tactics. These are acts that, if verified, constitute desecration of remains and potentially war crimes, and the machine used to commit them is made in Peoria, Illinois. Caterpillar has not commented on these specific incidents. Their stock price, for reference, increased 9% in 2023. Here is the industrial logic. Caterpillar makes the bulldozer. The U.S. government approves the export. Israel buys it using American military aid. The bulldozer gets shipped. Caterpillar gets paid. Then Israel uses the bulldozer to clear land in Gaza. The land gets cleared. Israel builds infrastructure on the cleared land. And eventually, when the fighting ends, someone will need to rebuild Gaza. Who do you think gets those contracts? This is the reverse profit loop. The same companies that provide the machinery for destruction position themselves to provide the machinery for reconstruction. It happened in Iraq. Bechtel, Halliburton, Caterpillar, all of them got reconstruction contracts after the invasion. It happened in Afghanistan, and it will happen in Gaza, if and when the international community agrees on a rebuilding plan. Destroy on Monday, rebuild on Tuesday. Invoice both. That is the mechanism. Now multiply it. Hyundai makes excavators used to demolish Palestinian homes in East Jerusalem. JCB, a British construction equipment manufacturer, same thing. Volvo sells trucks used to transport armored vehicles. Mercedes-Benz expedited delivery of 112 heavy transport trucks to the Israeli military in November 2023. The trucks are used to move Merkava battle tanks, which weigh 65 tons each, from base to battlefield. Every one of these companies is publicly traded. Every one has shareholders, and everyone can claim, accurately, that their products are dual use. A bulldozer is just a bulldozer. A truck is just a truck. The customer decides what to do with it. And if the customer uses it to commit war crimes, well, that is not the manufacturer's responsibility. Except at a certain point, willful ignorance becomes collaboration. Caterpillar has been sued multiple times over the use of D9s in demolitions. They have been the target of divestment campaigns. The Presbyterian Church divested in 2014. Multiple universities followed. And Caterpillar knows exactly how their equipment is being used because activists have been documenting it for 2 decades. So when they say they have no control, what they mean is they have chosen not to exercise control, because exercising control would mean losing contracts, and losing contracts would mean lower revenue, and lower revenue would mean angry shareholders. So the bulldozers keep shipping, and the homes keep getting demolished, and the executives keep telling investors that the company is committed to ethical business practices. And everyone involved can sleep at night because nobody personally drove the bulldozer. They just made it, or sold it, or financed it, or transported it, or approved the export license, or held the stock. The guilt is distributed so widely that it evaporates, but the bodies do not evaporate. Now let us talk about the part of the financial system that nobody sees: Offshore capital flows. Israel has a thriving venture capital industry, cybersecurity startups, AI companies, surveillance tech, autonomous weapons, facial recognition, border control systems. These companies raise money from investors all over the world: Silicon Valley, London, Singapore, and many of them have direct ties to the Israeli military. Unit 8200 is the Israeli Defense Forces Signals Intelligence Unit. It is the equivalent of the NSA. Recruits are screened in high school. The smartest ones get selected. They serve their mandatory military time inside Unit 8200, learning advanced cyber operations, hacking, surveillance, and data analysis. Then they finish their service and start companies. And because they have security clearances, because they have access to classified technology, and because they have a built-in customer in the Israeli military, their startups get funding fast. NSO Group, the company that makes Pegasus spyware, was founded by former Unit 8200 members. Cellebrite, the company that makes phone hacking tools used by police and intelligence agencies worldwide, same origin. Coresight, the facial recognition company whose cameras are used at checkpoints in Gaza, founded by people with deep ties to Israeli intelligence. These companies are not publicly traded, they are private, which means their funding comes from venture capital firms and private equity. And venture capital, unlike public markets, does not require disclosure. A VC firm can invest $10 million in an Israeli spyware company and never tell anyone. The investment stays private until there is an exit, an acquisition, or an IPO. And by that time, the money has already been made. So when you ask who is funding Israel, part of the answer is hidden in offshore funds, structured investment vehicles, and private placements that will not show up in any public database. Wealthy individuals, sovereign wealth funds, family offices, all of them looking for high returns in a sector that is growing fast because governments everywhere are buying surveillance technology. And Israel makes the best surveillance technology because Israel has been testing it on Palestinians for decades. Gaza is not just a weapons showroom, it is a tech incubator. Coresight AI, the facial recognition company, openly marketed their system as proven in complex urban environments. Translation: we have been scanning Palestinian faces at checkpoints for years, and the system works. After October 7th, Coresight's technology was deployed at scale. Soldiers carried tablets with facial recognition software. Refugees fleeing south were stopped, scanned, and cross-referenced against databases. Thousands detained. And Coresight, according to the New York Times in March 2024, is now pitching the system to governments in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Combat tested. Another company, Infinidome. They make GPS protection systems for drones. Prevents jamming. After October 7th, Infinidome said they were working day and night to supply the Israeli military. Their CEO told an Israeli outlet that the company has been protecting Israeli military drones since 2018. And now they are marketing the technology to the U.S. Department of Transportation and to defense customers worldwide. Proven reliability, they say. We kept Israeli drones flying through the most hostile electronic warfare environment in the region. Another one, Smart Shooter. They make a targeting sight for rifles. It is called the Smash system. Point the rifle at a moving target. The sight tracks it automatically, compensates for movement, wind, distance. When the shot is guaranteed to hit, the sight lights up. Pull the trigger. Automatic headshot. The system has been used by Israeli special forces in Gaza since November 2023. Smart Shooter posted about it on Twitter. Photos of soldiers using the system, testimonials. And now they are selling it to militaries and police forces on 3 continents. No training required, the marketing says. Point and click. This is dual-use technology in its purest form. The same facial recognition that organizes your photos tracks refugees. The same GPS anti-jamming that keeps delivery drones on course keeps killer drones on target. The same auto-targeting that could help elderly hunters could also turn any conscript into a sniper. And all of it is legal. None of it is classified as weapons, so it does not fall under arms export regulations. It is just software, just hardware, dual use. And the money funding these companies does not come from governments. It comes from private investors who see a growth market and do not ask questions, or who ask questions and decide the returns are worth it, because the returns are real. Cellebrite went public in 2021. Valuation, $2.4 billion. NSO Group was valued at $1 billion in 2016. Palantir, which does similar work, is worth over $20 billion. This is not a niche market. This is a sector, and every dollar invested in that sector creates an incentive to keep the testing ground operational, because the value proposition depends on the phrase combat proven. And combat proven requires combat, which means the investors, whether they admit it or not, have a financial interest in the continuation of conflict, not because they are evil, but because the business model requires it. That is the perverse logic of the occupation economy. Peace is bad for business. Let us shift. Settlement economy. This one is older and simpler and almost completely invisible to international consumers. The West Bank has been under Israeli military occupation since 1967. Within that occupation, Israel has built settlements, over 130 of them, housing more than 450,000 Israeli civilians. The settlements are illegal under international law. The Fourth Geneva Convention prohibits an occupying power from transferring its own civilian population into occupied territory. The International Court of Justice reaffirmed this in 2004. The UN Security Council reaffirmed it in 2016. Israel ignores all of it. But settlements are not just houses. They are economic zones, industrial parks, agricultural operations, factories. And those factories produce goods, cosmetics, wine, olive oil, dates, hummus, carbonated water. And for years, those goods were labeled Made in Israel and sold internationally with no indication that they came from occupied territory. Ahava Cosmetics Company. Their main factory is in Mitzpeh Shalem, an industrial zone inside a West Bank settlement. They extract minerals from the Dead Sea, which is on occupied land, and turn them into lotions and creams. For years, Ahava products were sold in Europe and North America, marketed as natural, ethical, from the Holy Land. Activists found out. Protests started. Retailers pulled the products. By 2017, Ahava closed most of its international operations. The BDS movement claimed it as a victory. SodaStream, home carbonation machines. Their main factory was in Mishor Adumim, a settlement industrial zone east of Jerusalem. The company employed Palestinians from nearby villages, paid them below minimum wage, marketed the product as eco-friendly. Activists called for a boycott. SodaStream fought back, ran ads during the Super Bowl, hired Scarlett Johansson as a spokesperson, but the pressure worked. In 2014, they announced they were closing the West Bank factory and moving production inside Israel's pre-67 borders. Another BDS victory, activists said. Except the model did not stop. It just got quieter. Settlement industrial zones still operate. Barkan, Ariel, Sha'ar Binyamin. They produce goods, electronics, textiles, food products. And those goods still enter the international market. The difference is labeling. After years of pressure, the European Union issued guidelines in 2015 requiring products from settlements to be labeled as such. Not made in Israel, made in Israeli settlement. The idea was to let consumers make informed choices. Israel fought the guidelines, called them discriminatory, anti-Semitic, an attack on Israeli sovereignty, and then found a workaround, reroute the goods through companies based inside Israel. The factory is in a settlement, but the company headquarters is in Tel Aviv, so the label says Made in Israel. Technically accurate, functionally deceptive, and it works. Most consumers have no idea. The economic value of settlement production is hard to quantify because the supply chains are deliberately opaque. But estimates put it in the hundreds of millions of dollars per year. And the bigger point is not the dollar amount. It is the model. Settlement economies create facts on the ground. Factories require workers. Workers require housing. Housing requires infrastructure, roads, water, electricity. And once that infrastructure is in place, the settlement is permanent. Even if a peace deal is signed, even if the land is supposed to be returned, the economics make it nearly impossible. You cannot just abandon a factory worth $50 million. So the factory stays, the workers stay, the settlement stays, and the occupation becomes irreversible. That is why settlement economics matter, not because they are the largest source of funding. They are not, but because they are the mechanism that turns temporary occupation into permanent annexation. And every product sold from a settlement is a small investment in that permanence. Tourism works the same way. Airbnb, until 2019, listed properties in West Bank settlements. You could rent a villa in Ariel, a cottage in Efrat, an apartment in Ma'ale Adumim. The listings described the locations as Israel. No mention of occupation, no mention of international law. Activists launched a campaign. Airbnb resisted for years. Then in 2019, they announced they would remove the listings. Human Rights Watch called it a step forward, but the removal was incomplete. Listings in East Jerusalem, which is also occupied territory under international law, stayed up. And enforcement was inconsistent. Some settlement listings were removed, others were just relabeled. The controversy faded, and by 2023, reports emerged that settlement listings were creeping back onto the platform, often disguised as being in nearby Israeli towns. Booking.com, same problem. Expedia, same problem. These platforms make money on every transaction, a small percentage of the rental price. And when the rental is in a settlement, that percentage is profit derived from occupied land. The platform does not own the property, does not build the settlement, just takes a cut. Clean hands, dirty money. This is micro-complicity at scale. Any individual transaction is tiny, a few dollars in commission, but multiply it by thousands of tourists every year, and it becomes a revenue stream. And that revenue stream makes the settlements economically viable, which makes them politically entrenched, which makes peace harder. And the tourists, for the most part, have no idea. They think they are staying in Israel. They think they are visiting historical sites. They do not know that the guest house they booked is built on land expropriated from a Palestinian family in 1984. They do not know that international law considers their presence there illegal. They do not know because nobody tells them, and the platforms do not tell them because telling them would reduce bookings, and reducing bookings would reduce revenue. So the information stays hidden, and the money keeps flowing, and the settlements keep expanding. But there is one piece of the settlement economy that is not hidden at all. In fact, it is celebrated: water. The West Bank sits on top of the mountain aquifer, one of the largest freshwater sources in the region. Under the Oslo Accords, signed in the 90s, Israel and the Palestinian Authority were supposed to share management of the aquifer. In practice, Israel controls it. The Israeli water company, Mekarot, drills the wells, manages the distribution, and sets the quotas. Palestinians in the West Bank are allocated 73 liters of water per person per day. The World Health Organization says the minimum for basic needs is 100 liters. Israeli settlers, living a few kilometers away, consume 300 liters per person per day, 4 times as much, and the water comes from the same aquifer. This is not a natural resource scarcity problem. This is an allocation problem, and the allocation is controlled by Israel, which uses it to make settlement life comfortable and Palestinian life difficult. Settlers have swimming pools. Palestinians ration drinking water. Settlers have green lawns. Palestinians watch their olive groves die. Mekarot is a government-owned company. It does not make profit in the traditional sense, but it does make the settlements viable, because without water you cannot live in the desert. And the West Bank settlements, many of them, are in arid areas. They only work because Mekarot pipes in water from the aquifer, which means Mekarot is not just a utility. It is infrastructure for annexation, and the water bills get paid by the settlers, by the Israeli government, by international development aid that funds West Bank water projects without asking whose wells are being drilled. Money flows in, water flows out, settlements grow, and the occupation becomes permanent. That is the settlement economy. Small transactions, diffuse responsibility, irreversible facts. Now let us talk about the new frontier: artificial intelligence. In April 2024, an investigation by Plus972 magazine revealed the existence of 2 AI systems used by the Israeli military in Gaza: Lavender and Gospel. We already talked about Lavender, the targeting system that generates kill lists with a 10% error rate. Gospel is different. Gospel targets buildings. The system analyzes surveillance data to identify structures that might be used by militants, command centers, weapons storage, meeting places. It assigns each building a score. If the score is high enough, the building gets added to a target list, and then the Israeli Air Force bombs it. The investigation found that in the first weeks of the bombardment, the military was approving Gospel's recommendations with minimal human oversight. Officers would look at the target for 20 seconds, verify it was a building, approve the strike. No analysis of who might be inside, no assessment of civilian casualties. The system said hit it, so they hit it. And here is the thing, Gospel is fast. A human analyst might identify 10 targets a day. Gospel identifies hundreds, which means the rate of bombing is limited only by the number of available aircraft and munitions. And since the U.S. expedited weapons deliveries, and since Boeing and Lockheed were producing around the clock, the constraint was not supply. The constraint was how fast pilots could fly sorties. By November, the Israeli Air Force had flown more strike missions in 1 month than the U.S. flew in a year in Afghanistan. And a significant percentage of those missions were based on targets selected by an algorithm. Now think about what that means for the companies providing the AI. Google is providing machine learning platforms through Nimbus. Microsoft is providing Azure AI services. Palantir is providing data integration. These companies are not writing the targeting algorithms. The Israeli military is doing that, but they are providing the infrastructure, the processing power, the data storage, the analytics tools. Without that infrastructure, systems like Lavender and Gospel could not operate at scale. So when a building gets bombed because an AI said to bomb it, and that AI is running on Google Cloud, is Google responsible? Legally, no. The decision to drop the bomb was made by the Israeli military. Morally, it is a different question. And tech companies do not want to answer moral questions. They want to answer product questions. Does the system work? Is the customer satisfied? Is the revenue recurring? And the revenue is very recurring. AI contracts are structured as ongoing services, monthly fees, per query costs. The more data processed, the more money charged, which means the more targets generated, the more profitable the contract. The business model scales with the violence. This is new. Weapons manufacturers have always profited from war. That is their business. But tech companies sold themselves as different, as neutral, as platforms. Their defense, when questioned about controversial clients, has always been the same. We do not control how people use our tools. We just build the tools. If someone uses Gmail to plan a crime, that is not Google's fault. If someone uses AWS to host a hate site, that is not Amazon's fault. But AI targeting is different because the tool is not neutral. It is purpose-built. When the Israeli military asks for access to machine learning platforms to process surveillance data and generate target lists, there is no ambiguity about use case. This is not a consumer using a general-purpose tool in an unexpected way. This is a military customer asking for a military capability, and the tech company says yes. That yes is a choice. And it is a choice that Google and Microsoft and Palantir made consciously, with legal teams reviewing the contracts, with executives approving the deals, and with full knowledge of what the systems would be used for. In February 2025, Google's parent company, Alphabet, lifted its ban on using AI tools for military purposes. The ban had been in place since 2018, after employees protested a Pentagon contract called Project Maven. That contract involved using Google's image recognition technology to analyze drone footage. Employees said it was a step toward autonomous weapons. Google backed out. But the ban is gone now, and the reason given was that geopolitical realities have changed. Translation: our competitors are doing it, and we are losing contracts. So the ethical stance that looked good in 2018 got quietly abandoned in 2025. And now Google can bid on military AI contracts without restriction, which brings us to the final piece: energy. There is a natural gas field off the coast of Gaza. It is called Gaza Marine. It was discovered in 2000. It contains an estimated 1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Under international law, that gas belongs to the Palestinian Authority. The PA licensed a consortium to develop it. British Gas, now part of Shell, was the lead developer. And then nothing happened, because developing the field requires infrastructure, offshore platforms, pipelines, processing facilities, and all of that requires investment. And investment requires political stability. And there is no political stability in Gaza because Israel has blockaded it since 2007. So the gas sits there, undeveloped, worth billions, and nobody can touch it. Here is the question nobody wants to ask. If Gaza were empty, could Israel develop that field? And if Israel could develop that field, would that change the economic calculus of the conflict? Let us be clear. There is no evidence that the current military operations are directly motivated by the gas field. No declassified memos, no smoking gun. But the fact that a multi-billion-dollar energy resource sits offshore of a territory that has been under blockade for 17 years and is now being systematically depopulated is not irrelevant. Israel is already developing offshore gas fields, the Tamar field, the Leviathan field. Both of them came online in the 2010s, and both of them turned Israel from an energy importer into an energy exporter. In 2022, Israel signed a deal to export natural gas to Europe through Egypt. The war in Ukraine made European countries desperate for alternatives to Russian gas, and Israel stepped in. Now, imagine adding Gaza Marine to that portfolio, another trillion cubic feet, another revenue stream, and no Palestinian Authority to negotiate with because the territory has been annexed or permanently occupied or depopulated to the point where governance is impossible. Again, no evidence this is the plan, but it is the context, and context matters, because the economics of occupation are not static. They evolve, and energy, especially in a world moving away from Russian and Middle Eastern oil, is the next frontier. Noble Energy, an American company based in Texas, is the lead developer of Israel's offshore fields. They were acquired by Chevron in 2020, which means Chevron now has a stake in Israeli energy independence. And energy independence, for Israel, is not just about domestic consumption, it is about export revenue. And export revenue is about geopolitical leverage. This is the long game, not just weapons contracts and tech deals, but reshaping the energy map of the Eastern Mediterranean, with Gaza as a variable that can be zeroed out if necessary. Follow the gas, not just the guns. Let us pull back. We have covered weapons manufacturers, logistics companies, tech giants, pension funds, settlement economies, AI targeting systems, offshore gas. Every piece of this is documented, every piece is legal, and every piece produces the same outcome. Money flows to Israel. Israel uses that money to maintain military dominance. That dominance enables occupation. The occupation generates data and battlefield conditions that make Israeli weapons and surveillance systems marketable as combat-proven. Those systems get exported. The exports generate revenue. The revenue reduces dependence on foreign aid, and the cycle continues. This is not a conspiracy. It is a system, and systems do not require intent. They require incentives, and the incentives here are clear. War is profitable. Occupation is profitable. Surveillance is profitable. And as long as those incentives exist, the financial ecosystem will reproduce itself. But systems can be disrupted. In 2024, Norway's sovereign wealth fund excluded multiple companies from its portfolio due to involvement in settlement activity and weapons sales to Israel. Ireland passed a law banning the import of goods from settlements. Multiple universities divested from Caterpillar, Elbit, and Lockheed Martin. Employees at Google, Amazon, and Microsoft organized internally, and some got fired, but the organizing did not stop. These are small cracks, but cracks matter, because the system depends on invisibility. It depends on the assumption that individual consumers and investors and employees cannot make a difference. It depends on the diffusion of responsibility. And when that diffusion is challenged, when someone says, "I will not hold that stock, I will not work on that contract, I will not buy that product," the system loses a piece of its foundation. The BDS movement, boycott, divestment, sanctions, has been running for 20 years. It has been called anti-Semitic by governments, banned in some jurisdictions, and relentlessly attacked by pro-Israel advocacy groups. And it has also successfully pressured companies to divest, universities to cut ties, and artists to cancel performances. Whether you agree with BDS or not, the fact that it generates that much opposition tells you something. It is a threat, not a military threat, not a political threat, a financial threat. And financial threats, in a system built on profit, are the only threats that matter. Here is the final loop. Remember the number from the beginning, serial number 81873, the guidance fin made in Santa Clarita, the fin that guided the bomb that killed 45 people in Rafah. That number is traceable. Researchers found it, journalists reported it, and now it is in the record, which means someone at Woodward knows that their component killed those people, and someone at Boeing knows their bomb did it, and someone at Lockheed knows their plane dropped it, and someone at the Pentagon knows they approved the sale, and someone in Congress knows they funded it, and every single one of them can say, "It was not my decision. I just made the part. I just approved the export. I just allocated the budget." The responsibility is distributed so widely that it disappears. But the record does not disappear. The serial numbers do not disappear. The flight logs and the contracts and the earnings calls and the employee lawsuits do not disappear. They accumulate. And at a certain point, the accumulation becomes undeniable. This is not about changing anyone's mind. This is about creating a cost. If you are a pension fund manager, the cost is reputational. If you are a tech employee, the cost is moral. If you are a shareholder, the cost is financial. If divestment campaigns succeed. If you are a voter, the cost is political. If conditioning aid becomes a campaign issue. The system runs on the assumption that these costs are lower than the benefits. Disrupt that assumption, and the system changes. Not overnight, not through one protest or one boycott or one shareholder resolution, but incrementally, company by company, contract by contract, until the profit margin on occupation shrinks and the political cost of enabling it rises, and the executives running these companies decide it is not worth it anymore. That is the only leverage that works, not moral appeals, not UN resolutions, financial pressure, legal liability, market risk. The same forces that built the system can dismantle it, but only if they are activated, and they are only activated when enough people decide that their complicity, however small, however diffuse, is unacceptable. So here is where we are. The question was, who is really funding Israel today? And the answer is not a person. It is not a lobby. It is not a government. It is a decentralized network of corporations, investors, pension funds, tech companies, logistics firms, weapons manufacturers, and financial instruments, all operating within legal frameworks, all making rational decisions within their own context, and all producing an outcome that none of them would individually endorse, but all of them collectively enable. The U.S. provides $3.8 billion in military aid, but that aid is a subsidy for American weapons manufacturers. Germany provides submarines, but the contracts employ German workers. Google provides cloud infrastructure, but it is just a service contract. Pension funds hold defense stocks, but they are just following the index. Caterpillar sells bulldozers, but they are just construction equipment. And Israel uses all of it to maintain an occupation, expand settlements, and bomb civilian populations. And everyone involved can say they were just doing their job. That is the system, and the system is funded by all of us, through taxes, through retirement accounts, through consumer choices, through the infrastructure we use daily. The phones in our pockets run on cloud services that also run military targeting systems. The retirement funds securing our futures hold stock in companies that make cluster bombs. And the international economy we participate in is built on trade agreements that make occupation profitable. There is no opt-out, not completely, But there are choices. Divest from weapons manufacturers, support campaigns to condition military aid, pressure tech companies to drop military contracts, buy products that are not made in settlements, vote for politicians who will enforce international law. Small actions, incremental pressure, but pressure nonetheless, because the alternative is to accept that this is just how the world works, that profit justifies violence, that legality excuses complicity, and that the geometry of rational self-interest aggregated across millions of transactions can produce a genocide and nobody is responsible. That acceptance is what the system requires to function. Disrupt it. Tell us in the comments which part of this story they never taught in school. The World Bank estimates that if Gaza were allowed to develop its offshore gas field, the revenue could fund the entire reconstruction of the territory and provide economic independence for the Palestinian Authority. The field has been undeveloped for 25 years. The gas is still there. The drills are not. And in the rubble of Gaza City, there is a database, stored on Amazon Web Services, containing the names, addresses, and biometric data of almost everyone who used to live there. The database is still running. The servers are still processing queries, and the bill every month gets paid.